Good evening, folks. Welcome to those of you who are live. Getting my camera set up here. Do I have audio? It looks like I do. There we go. So tonight I was going to talk about a bunch of user questions or viewer questions. Sorry, let me get my camera aligned properly here. There we go. So I was going to talk about a bunch of questions I tend to get. I've been doing this podcast, or this live stream rather, for about 6 months, a bit over 6 months, and have gone through a lot of topics. So please check out the comments in the questions. So the links in the comments for links to the biohacking articles that I've written about everything from sleep to stress to ADHD to managing substance relationships to all kinds of things. So I encourage you to go check all those things out. They are on the website, and a lot of my discussions have focused on this idea of taking control of our health and our wellness by understanding how our brain works and taking some control over those particular features. So, I've had a lot of questions over the past few months about these things. And what I wanted to do is to cover some of the stuff that people have been asking about. And, some of that is a neurofeedback kind of focused topic set. So I don't want to make this just about neurofeedback, but I thought I would cover a few things that are germane to neurofeedback. Let me see. I see a few folks showing up. Hey guys, welcome. Just give me an audio check if you could, as well as say hello, so I know that you're actually there in real person, not a YouTube robot. And if you have not been to one of these live streams before, if you haven't watched before, hello, I'm Andrew Hill. I own a company called Peak Brain. I also helped found a company called True Brain. And I taught at UCLA for about a dozen years, teaching courses on neuroscience and gerontology, and sort of developed this perspective of we can take good control, good care of ourselves by understanding how things work, and by moving through personal transformation by understanding, some of the deeper things about how our brain works. So if you haven't been to one of these one of these talks before, the format is I'll do a little bit of neurofeedback and describe the actual protocol that I'm using and some of the ideas around it while answering questions. And tonight I have a bunch of questions around the process of neurofeedback that people keep asking. So I thought I would go over some of those. Hey, Triona, welcome. I see we have some people saying hello, hello. And it sounds good. That's great. I have a bunch of wires here I'm untangling. So let me take off my headset. And I think what I'm going to do tonight is let's go look at our neurofeedback. What do you think we're going to do tonight? Hey, Radar Ashwood, welcome. While I'm setting up my neurofeedback, what are your favorite neurofeedback protocols? Why don't you guys tell me in the chat or in the live stream comments? Let's see. I'm going to do... let's see what I should do. Okay, I think I'm going to do... I never give this nearly enough thought. I promise if you do neurofeedback with me, I'm thinking about your neurofeedback all day long. But it's kind of like when I was a teenager and worked in bakeries a lot. I didn't like to cook at home very much when I was working in bakeries. It just kind of took the fun out of it a little bit. So I sometimes forget to set my own protocols up with any degree of care or finesse and just kind of pick something. So I think tonight I am going to do something a little bit different. I haven't done it in a little while. I'm doing a C4 minus PZ. So C4, oops, let me clear that. C4, just type it minus PZ. There we go. And I will do, this is a fine frequency set, 4 to 7, inhibit. The reward is 11.5 to 14.5, which is called SMR or low beta. And then we have a high inhibit in the faster beta frequencies above 20. So let me save this. And then try to set myself up without my cat here deciding the wires are for her. She might. Okay. So let me set myself up and answer any questions. Radar is saying T3 minus FP1 is one of Radar's faves. So T3, left temporal, FP1, frontopolar tip on the left side. And what would that be for? So I would assume that with FP1 involved, you're getting a motivation or an approach kind of lift. But what is that FP1 minus T3 or T3 minus FP1? What does that do for you, Radar? What effects do you get out of that? Okay, we have an ear clip. So I have some tangled wires here I have to detangle. That's the one hazard. You're always detangling wires. And I got one wire for the head. There we go. And a second wire for the head. Okay. So, hey, hello everyone who's wandering in tonight. Radar says T3 minus FP1 helps with attention, focus, and mood. I can see that. Have you tried FP1 minus A1, Radar? Is it any different subjectively from FP1 minus T3? Like, does the temporal lobe really have a contribution there? Or is it just an easy place to reference? All right, what I'm doing is taking some paste and putting it on silver wires and hanging it off my head. Radar says T4 minus FP2, so the right-hand side, also good, helps with feeling emotionally balanced. So let me guess, are you doing beta rewards on the left and something different on the right, or are you also doing beta rewards on the right for that T4 minus FP2, Radar? What's up with that? All right, so I'm put a ground wire on my left ear. There we go. I have an EEG amplifier here, little Q-Wiz. And the ground on this one is the green socket. And then try to get the wires off your microphone. This is the bane of the biohacking YouTuber. So now I have two green wires for my head, and generally my rule of thumb is don't use the same color wires if you can avoid using both the same color on your head. But these are different texture anyways. I have some coated, silicone coated ones and some uncoated ones, and they act a little different, so I can at least feel the difference. The point of using different colored ones, or in this case, ones that feel different, is you don't want to have to follow visually down to the amplifier and kind of figure out which wire is going where. You want to be able to look at the amplifier sockets and look at the individual holes and figure out which wire should be in which place on your head, and then kind of see, is that the right wire, off to the side when you're self-training. So my thicker wire is in my main socket, the red socket. And where is my paste? Oh, lots of other people saying hello. Hello, everyone. El Chadanero, what's the rule on ground location reference? And reference, both. So ground can go anywhere. I mean, literally anywhere. The ground could go on your toe, and it would still work just fine, as long as it's picking up your electrical environment. Is my C3? So my C4 in line? It's pretty close. And then I'm doing a PZ with the other half. There we go. So the ground can go anywhere. In this case, I'm doing C4 minus PZ. So PZ is the thing we call the reference. That's a bit of a misnomer because you're really subtracting two locations to create your signal. So I'm putting that one on the back of my head. There we go. So Trina has a question. Actually, thank you, Radar, for answering my question. You trained 14, 16 left for that FP1 T4 and 12 to 14 right. Okay, yeah. I was assuming it was a bit slower. It wasn't up in the faster beta frequencies, although you're still in the low beta, which for some people can be a little irritating on the right. So Triona says, can we talk about associations with high frontal alpha and high posterior low beta? You're more familiar with high theta or high beta, but not as familiar with common symptoms of high frontal alpha. You're going to get a lot of avoidance. It's going to be really hard to initiate action with high front midline alpha. Jay has a couple of observations, Jay Gunkelman, and I forget which medication it is, but there's some medications, it may be stimulants, it may be modafinil, but there's some medications that he reported working well with that variant. But generally the front midline alpha will produce a mix of anxiety and executive difficulties. And so what you'll generally end up with is something that looks like avoidant and anxious and kind of ADHD, but people that freeze up and feel overwhelmed when they try to do things. I mean, to the point where they know they have to do things and just cannot initiate action. It's sort of an approach avoid kind of conflict that creeps in with that alpha. Part of the anterior, think about what the anterior cingulate's supposed to be doing, Triona. It's supposed to be helping you hold things in your mind and sort of select from competing ideas and thoughts so you can sort of hold what you're valuing in your mind, essentially. That's why when you go forward to the genu of the anterior cingulate, you might be in some areas involved with the valuing aspects of love. So it's that appraisal kind of thing is in the front midline. So if it's making tons of fast alpha, what you end up with is this phenomena where it idles super fast but can't kick out of that mode. And so people get frozen up in this approach versus avoidant kind of mode. So the back midline, the low beta being high in the back will probably also produce a bit of outside world activated sort of sensitivity, a threat sensitivity or a sensory scanning, something like that. All right, let me kick off my session here. Radar Ashwood is asking, what is frontal midline theta? What is FMT? That's a great question. Let me start my session and start my back midline theta suppression. I'm gonna run it, pick a simple game. Let's use jump box tonight. Jump box is a tiny bit buggy, but let's see if we can get it working. All right, so my signals look pretty good as long as I don't touch the wires too much. Initializing, and then we have EEG. Yay, EEG. It's always nice to have brainwaves. So let me move my head over for those of you who haven't seen eager before. Upper left, it says A equals C4 minus PZ. That's showing you the channels that we are, or the channel, single channel that we're using to gather data off my head. And then we have below that, B is blank because there's only one channel in use. Below that's 4 to 7, it's labeled, which is the amount of theta. And you can see my under my head, I am making, the average is 36 microvolts of theta. I want that to go down. So I've set a threshold, THR, at 39 microvolts. And that's the lines you can see outside the waveform. And whenever my theta surges past those lines, it'll stop the game. My theta dips down a little bit, it'll allow the game to pass. The same thing's true for the other bands, that there's this 11.5 hertz band that I'm making 14 microvolts. I want to make more. So I've set a threshold at 10.75 here. And you can see what that does is allow the game to run when my waveform is outside the threshold lines, those lines that track the trace. We have another inhibit below that. So let me start this. So I'm going to hit enter to deselect all bands. I'm then going to F11, F9, F11, which will auto scale and auto threshold a little bit. And you can see what happened to my little game screen. All my little game boxes got teeny. Now, this is something to know if you use Eager, that the games that have these boxes on them, like Jump Box and like Box Lights, the scaling of the bands on this training screen will impact the size of the game boxes. And that middle game box is the reward. So I'm going to select my middle band here with a mouse. I'm going to hit F9, which will select my scale box, SC. I'm going to hit minus to decrease the scale and increase the size of the waveform and also the size of the reward box. So now you can see I have a picture in that box. I hit enter twice to deselect everything. I'm going to F11, which auto scales, or it moves the thresholds against the targets, and then F5 to begin. And now I'm training. There we go. Okay, so we are off. We are training. Now I can go back and answer more questions. And please ask questions. I would rather answer your questions than regurgitate things that I had planned. It's much more fun to answer questions. All right, let's see. Okay, so radar, front midline theta. Theta's useful in the front midline briefly, phasically. Bursts of it are okay. And front midline theta, when it's bursting or when it's phasic, maybe something that is useful to release moments of awareness, of insight, to let memories bubble up. It may be useful, it may be necessary, in fact. But when you get stuck in that mode, when front midline theta becomes tonic, now you have a set of circuits that have a really hard time regulating. Sorry, I'm going to rescale this eager. I don't know if you guys can tell, but the little picture grid is distorting because the reward picture is distorting because I've made it too big and it's a little bit disconcerting to look at. So I'm going to change that back up to 5 for its scale. That's fine. Okay. So the front midline theta will produce essentially disinhibited anterior cingulate. And that can manifest in a bunch of ways. At the very least, it'll generally produce some difficulty with motivation, kind of like that front midline high alpha, usually a faster alpha in the front midline. So it's difficulty initiating action, but when the theta is really high, it will end up with tic-like phenomena, including biting our nails or songs stuck in our head really aggressively, or other kinds of disinhibited sort of stimulus capture by the attention, where the attention latches on to interesting things, but it's hard to pull them away. Like an obsessive focus almost, kind of like worrying at things, like biting your nails. So that front midline theta generally gets a bit stuck, and it can also produce more acute tic-like phenomena and other OCD-like phenomena. But the more acute the excess front midline theta is, the more likely you are also to see excess front midline beta. So now that circuit's running and revving in high gear, not just disinhibited. And you may see low power alpha, especially in the slower alpha 1, like 7 to 10 range. And if you see those phenomena with high front midline theta, but also high beta, now you're probably dealing with fairly classic OCD type things, with ritual behavior, intrusive thoughts, and all kinds of interesting combination features. I hope that was a sufficient explanation of front midline theta. Ask me if you have more questions on that. Triona is saying, bingo with the symptoms of the alpha. Definitely the experience, and just wanted to confirm, maybe associated with high alpha. Yeah, likely. You may want to try tamping that down. Try some FC minus PZ down training. Especially if you have high theta and high alpha, then you probably don't want to do any rewarding of alpha on the midline. You probably want to do instead inhibiting only. And you can play around with like where you're most excessive and track some of the inhibit bands and do some squashing or some windowed squashing, as Pete Van Dusen might call it. Trina has one more alpha question. What about if there's a lot of hypercoherence in alpha? Is that common with Asperger's, or have you found other common experiences with hypercoherence in alpha? Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same set of symptoms I described. That alpha will only show up if hypercoherent generally. So it's that anxious, avoidant kind of mode, hard initiating action, that kind of thing. Yeah, it does show up with Asperger's more than in the typical background amount. And it shows up in ADHD more than in typical background populations, probably double or triple in those populations compared to in the more neurotypical population with like more simple anxiety. Avoidant anxiety is a thing. but it shows up a lot in ADHD and a lot in, well, I wouldn't even say Asperger's. I would say with social anxiety or with social difficulties. Then you'll get some avoidant phenomena. And, maybe it's learned at that point. And maybe with the ADHD, it's learned because it's so difficult to initiate and sustain attention that it can be hard to initiate, anything but protecting the current moment, i.e. you protect, you procrastinate, you don't let things into your attention that can draw and occupy resources. So that may be one of the mechanisms around the avoidant anxiety, the avoidant detachment, procrastination kind of mode that happens in that mix of executive and anxious, essentially, difficulties. So what I'm doing here for the game, you guys can see that the middle box is swelling large, and that's happening when my 11.5 band is getting big. And you can see that my outside boxes get small. And when all three things happen, the white bricks at the bottom are going to bounce across the bottom. And then if they make it all the way, I guess it's an orange brick when it's moving. When it makes it all the way off to the right, then it turns into a blue brick. And the point is to stack as many blue bricks. Oh, so close. And then this is showing me that I had 148 beeps or points, the upper right-hand score, against 169 seconds, which is standard for this game. 3 minutes with a 10-second pause. So this is mostly involuntary, what I'm doing. Now, I hear the beeps. You can probably hear them. And I'm aware visually the TV screen is at eye line behind my camera. So I can see what's happening in this giant screen. It's very, visually striking. But you can kind of ignore neurofeedback, and the brain still notices the coming and going of the stimulus, the visuals, the audio. Even pure audio, you can ignore games in the background and do something else, and they still kind of work. The neurofeedback experience works. So it doesn't have to be this voluntary. In fact, that's often what I'm asked is how much I could try to do it. And the point is you don't have to. You put wires on your head, you set the software up, and you let it happen. The brain gets applauded when it makes certain brain waves. And the game will then adjust over time so that the applause only happens when the brain is moving in the right direction. So it's this very basic process of operant conditioning. And it's really happening at the brain level, not the mind level. So Radar's asking, can front midline theta be trained down? Absolutely, yeah. FMT, front midline theta, is generally fairly responsive to neurofeedback. I would say, though, there's a couple different causes for front midline theta. There's a cause that shows up classically in several flavors of anxiety. It's pretty tractable. There's also a driver of front midline theta that shows up, I think, in Parkinsonian phenomena and other advanced aging phenomena. And I don't think that one, even though it shows up in the same frequency range and in the same location, I don't believe it's as tractable as the sort of more classic anxious OCD/anxiety one, /ADHD one. So yes, generally you can train it. It's pretty tractable, but it's probably not just going to be about your front midline. Remember that you have other circuits on the right and the left whose jobs are to supervise and initiate some of your executive function resources. So if you really do have a lot of front midline theta at FZ, you probably have to be doing some work with montages like FZ minus CZ, or combining FZ and something else like FZ A1 down training of theta with a C4 executive function or something. It really depends on what your EEG looks like, but there's probably other hints of where the other sort of big portion of that dysregulation is. And it's probably somewhere in that precentral strip, that C strip. So look for things in the C area that you can train in segments perhaps with your FZ. And that's a gentler way to do it and probably more germane to what's actually going on. If you do have actual high chronic, so tonic front midline theta. Woo, speaking of training and training effects, I'm getting a crazy heavy-eyed sensation from this protocol right now. I don't know if I put the wires. It's all right. My C4 is all right. It's a tiny bit high, but no, I don't know why I'm feeling it, but like waves of fatigue are washing over me. in this training right now. I do this training every so often. I kind of like it. It's an SMR variant, but man, it's making me feel kind of chill right this second and kind of like logy and lethargic. So, all right, more questions. Triana, you're welcome for the elaboration of alpha. My pleasure. El Chadorino, was there one with an island or ocean you would float or move toward? Yeah. There's one of each. One called Islands and one called Highway, and they're the same game. Here, I'm gonna restart this just for fun, and run a session or two. Island and Highway. It's really kind of silly. I wasn't gonna make this the game one, but I will. So let me run a segment of Island, and then a segment of Highway, because it's really kind of silly. All right, so here's Island. And as soon as my amp wakes up again, I'll start it off. Okay. So now we have Island, and you can see the blue bar is the main reward. The purple box is my theta. The yellow box is my beta. When the blue bar is wide, it paints a little white stripe on the water. So the metaphor here is you're in a boat leaving an island, and this is the wake of the boat as it drifts out behind the boat. And if you are getting rewards, then you're leaving flecks of foam on the water on the midline of your wake. Every beep also throws up a seagull in the sky. And then at 500 points, the volcano explodes and fills the portion of the lake that it's in with confetti. It's really silly. So El Chadorino, you say this is burned into your retinas, this game? Let me drag my eager around a little bit. My mouse seems to be, there it is. Yeah, you haven't seen this in 20 years. Yeah, it's super old school. Works great. And a lot of adults love this game. It's kind of funny. People come in and they want to try all the games. They try lots of things, but they generally end up like settling on the more simple games because they sort of enjoy them more. It's kind of interesting. All right, and let's grab another game since we're here. I want to show you just how similar. So that was Island, right? Now let's look for, now let's run Highway. Now you remember how Island looked, right? With the volcano, etc. I'm going to show you a Highway, which is another old school game. And it's not that different. Is it running? Let's see. Not running. Where's my mouse? There it is. So you can see here. So we were running on Island, and now we're running on Highway. So don't ever accuse old school neurofeedback vendors for having crazy amounts of creativity. So yeah, this is exactly the same game, but with a slightly different visual metaphor. Now we're looking down a road that apparently has water on it. And it's instead of seagulls popping up, we have stars in the sky. And instead of a volcano exploding at 500 points, we have a little hot air balloon floats by. So, all right. Way better than Pac-Man. Hey, Chatterino, I have variable.mazes on this computer too. We could show you that if you want. Hey, VJ. Could talk a bit about the dual protocol and where it originated from. Ooh, getting all sophisticated. So the dual is a two-channel segmented protocol. If you've worked with Peak Brain, you'll know that I use a combination of individual segments sequenced within one protocol, one session, or combinations of two protocols at once. And what the dual is both of those things at the same time. So it's a two-channel protocol, and then it has a segmented process where you do two channels. In this case, I forget which dual you've seen, VJ. I assume it's the frontal to central version. And what that does is it brings up left and right hemisphere circuits through contingent training. So like F3A1 and F4A2 are trained at the same time. And what that does is train beta up on the left and alpha up on the right for a mood and motivation lift. And then you would move the wires back to C3 and C4 and do a classic beta SMR, bringing up another executive function lift. So you're getting the primary effects of, in theory, mood and then executive function. But as you may have noticed, it's a sweep. You know, and sweeps can be special when you combine protocols and move into adjacent areas. And so the dual is one of my first sweeps that I developed because it takes the contingent dual of C3A1, C4A2 that I really enjoy and works really well for interhemispheric communication, broad executive function, sleep, social function, all kinds of interesting things. And the bilateral frontal or frontal asymmetric, which can be done at F3, F4, F3A1, F4A2, or done at F7A1, F8A2, works pretty well as well. And so you can do the dual sweeping back from front to central, and it creates this compounding effect on, I think, the interhemispheric communication. So it seems to create the same effects you get from either of those components, and then there's this lingering additional effect that is a little hard to explain. It's probably not worth doing, or maybe a bit contraindicated if you're somebody who carries a lot of anxiety, because that combination of sweep is going to be activating in a way that's a little powerful, the same way that doing something, another protocol that's a special peak brain variant, I call the alpha theta sweep, where we do 3 different variants of alpha theta in quick succession, moving down the midline. And again, it's a bilateral interhemispheric communication protocol. In the case of alpha theta, it's a sum instead of a dual. The difference in the beta dual protocols is we're making the 2 sides contingent. We're not making them do the same thing or communicate in the same frequencies necessarily. You know, we're training up beta on the left and SMR on the right at the same time. So the combination circuits are being worked out, but you're not necessarily requiring a phase relationship across those 2 frequencies the same way as you would doing an alpha theta sweep, where you're doing summed protocols, i.e. adding the channels together first and then filtering out the bands. In a sum protocol, you have what looks like 3 bands in the screen that you're training, and not, you know, just like this, it looks like a 1-channel protocol. Because in a sum, what you're really doing is creating 1 channel out of 2 channels. You're summing them together first. And what that does is preferentially reward the phase relationship between the sides. So when you do that in theta, powerful stuff. But I don't want to do that necessarily in beta. So we're having asymmetric protocols. Those duals are all asymmetric. And then we're just really working on the sweep effect to create a localized and interhemispheric kind of amount of, you know, push in that protocol. Kind of heady stuff, pun intended. Radar is asking, is there any potential for MRI? Yeah, there is. fMRI. I worked at McLean Hospital around the same time that they discovered fMRI neurofeedback there. It was just a few months later that I was working there doing some imaging, working in the ECT center, doing MRI imaging of people that were going off of their meds so we could look at the brain structure changes. And there was a study going on in the basement in a different MRI part of McLean, and they were bringing people into MRI centers to do another depression-style MRI and try to figure out if there was blood flows, fMRI, a blood flow activity in part of the brain that may be different for this depression population. And they kept having people climb out of the scanner going, ooh, that treatment felt great. I feel great. And the researcher says, well, wait a minute. There wasn't a treatment. We just did a scan, fMRI of some area. And I forget what area it was. Maybe the caudate. I forget exactly what area it was. But the blood flow was different in a way that was measurable. And they were scanning this, and people that were depressed were climbing out of the scanners with a mood lift. And so they actually developed a visual-based neurofeedback system that was driven by the BOLD response, the blood oxygen level dependent response. And it's essentially the blood flow activation of that part of the brain. And they yoked it to a flame. and you would make the flame, you concentrate and make the flame get bigger. So it wasn't neurofeedback the way that we think about it on EEG being mostly involuntary. But for those of you who've done some HEG, there is a semi-voluntary component to perfusion, right? You can kind of control HEG, at least the gross on-off surging of blood flow. For those of you who are not aware, HEG is an infrared camera you wear, and it measures waves of heat coming off your head in a near infrared, passive kind of infrared way. And when there's a metabolism change, it gets picked up by, this is a temperature signal. But that's a neurovascular change, not just a neuron change. And what that means is it's blood flow, it's temperature. And so that's what fMRI was also getting, was a blood flow change. And so when you do vascular neurofeedback, you're actually doing it in a way that's somewhat voluntary, even if it's in the central nervous system. The general rubric is, if you're training peripheral systems, meaning the heart rate or the skin conductance or anything else you can feel, the breath, then you're doing it sort of in a way where you can be aware of the nerves firing and kind of feel them and learn to control them. But we generally think about things inside the bone, the central nervous system, as being imperceptible. But that's not actually true. You can kind of feel your blood flow, and you kind of can effortfully control, by concentrating or thinking happy thoughts, control blood flow, because it's kind of a gross feature. It's kind of a big change. It's not as subtle or as narrow as the billions of EEG things that are happening at any one point in time. All right, so let's see. Triona says, oh, VJ likes it. Thank you. Yeah, VJ gave the protocol F3A1, F4A2, and then C301, C4A2. Yeah. So it's a beta alpha asymmetric followed by a beta SMR asymmetric. And there's some tricks here. Be careful inhibiting alpha on the left. Be careful rewarding too low on the right. You often want to step back in frequency a little bit. When going from the front to the back, the beta drops a little bit and hurts. So if you're a provider who does this stuff, or a biohacker, talk to me. We'll, help you develop some protocols maybe. Triona is asking, I keep going with questions on frequencies. Cool. We love frequencies. What association can be made with low delta and theta by somebody recovering from a concussion? Is that different than if someone has high delta? Hey, that's a great question. Yeah. So first of all, let's think about what happens in a concussion that would produce delta. So if you got a crush injury on a patch of tissue, that patch of tissue within it is now having trouble organizing. And therefore, it's having trouble making complex frequencies in the area. And so it defaults back to like the brainstem, the basic frequency of metabolism, also a frequency that calls for a lot of blood flow, i.e. delta. So delta in the brain when you're sleeping really ramps up, and it acts like this agitation wave in the brain, just like a washing machine does, agitation cycle, and moves the dirt off the clothes. We have a 2 hertz agitation pressure wave in our cerebral spinal fluid at night in the big slow wave sleep delta bursts. So delta's acting like this cleaning phenomena and this healing, this high perfusion phenomena, and that's an excess amount of delta. So the tissue gets crushed, isn't sure what to do, and defaults back into this deep rest and repair mode where it's basically trying to heal all the time, and delta is usually excessively high. And then what you'll see is over a year or two, perhaps with some concussions, or with a course of neurofeedback, this will be accelerated, is the delta goes from being really excessive and in the way. People have a lot of brain fog and fatigue and post-concussion syndrome stuff when the delta is that high, especially if it's broad. And that will drop away over a year or two. And then you'll see in the same regions that sustain the injury, you'll see low power, blues and the QEEGs, low power delta. And I believe what we're looking at is essentially the tissue having recovered from being stuck in healing mode, but being a little weak in general. And then you would think that tissue might overactivate every so often, might cramp up every so often. And if that tissue's like in the right front, now we can be dealt with things like rage or dread. If that tissue's in the back of the head, you might get visual snow or other visual kind of sensory component stuff. So it generally does still mean a deficit, but it's not nearly the same kind of deficit that excessive slow waves would be right after an injury. And then just to complete the concussion picture, if instead of a crush injury, or maybe in addition, you also sustain a shear injury, let's say you're a cyclist and you're spinning as you go down, that shear force will pull the brain a little bit away from itself in parts. And most of the neurons across any distance are inhibitory interneurons. Neurons' job is to dampen the gain between regions, essentially, and make things less likely to fire. So if you suddenly rip a bit of tissue away from the surrounding tissue, you break all the inhibitory interneurons that act as local braking and inhibition to that bit of tissue. And then you'll see a little free-running, rapid, high level of beta, very strong beta and strong fast frequency betas as well. And you can see both. You can see an area that has lots of delta and some beta. And so look at the coherences to try to figure that out. And if you're ever seeing anything in coherence, and this is probably true, Triana, even though I believe you saw a real feature there for yourself, whenever you see stuff in coherence, make sure you understand why it's hypercoherent or hypocoherent, because muscle tension and noise and movement and coughs are really, really, really easily brought into acute EEG, especially in a linked ears montage you'd be using for coherence. To calculate coherence, you need a shared reference. So you're not going to look at a coherence in like Laplacian context, only in linked ears. And so you're going to have high potential for spreading noise around in that kind of montage, noise meaning muscle tension or 50 or 60 hertz noise from the environment. So be a little bit skeptical of coherence. You can believe it generally when it's specific, when it's just alpha coherence. It's probably real, but keep looking because it'll be caused by other frequencies as well, most likely. All right, other questions. Radar, do you know anything about using biofeedback to control stomach acid? A little bit. HRV biofeedback can control the rest and digest cycles in the stomach. You could also do training over the left side C areas. There's some debate, but I've heard and I've used both C1 and C5 to get at gastric areas. You would do a slowed SMR, and you might get down through the cortex into visceral representation areas that sort of are folded under. So you can try a low beta or a low SMR slowed for yourself at half a hertz slower than you might need in the C1 or C5 kind of regions. Those might do some really good things to your gut. I've worked with people who have had gut surgeries or gut injuries and found that some of that left side protocol set can relax that experience of the gut. I don't know if it's because it's just working on the vagus nerve and the anxiety. With vagus, of course, you want to work on FZ minus PZ as well, or PZ minus A1. Those big hubs of the cingulates are heavily involved with the vagus regulation and impacted by the vagus. So remember, folks, what happens in the vagus doesn't stay in the vagus. So if you have vagal issues, then you probably want to be looking around for other co-regulating tissues and trying to figure out what else you can work on in that default mode network, because the vagus and the default mode are pretty, they're in cahoots. So look out. All right, let's see. El Chatterino, is the slow wave being present after organic healing has occurred? The signaling being stuck in safe mode pattern until it's poked or worked with at times? Yeah, maybe. It could be in safe mode because the information processing is confused. I also think that there's a perfusion increase with increases in delta, so it serves a functional purpose of increasing blood flow and other tissue flow to maybe help healing accelerate. I also think that you're unlikely to do much healing if you go into heavy glutamatergic, high beta firing modes, or dopaminergic firing modes. So maybe that's also why it goes into delta. It's not a very strong firing mode, so to speak. Certainly not very rapid with these high amplitude slow waves. So those are some questions, guys. I appreciate your attention and participation tonight. That's awesome. So did I have any other burning questions? You've all been such good question answerers that I've enjoyed talking to you. These are much more interesting than most of the questions that I talked about thus far tonight. I think for the next couple of these, I will do live streams. I think I'm going to make the next couple more AMA Q&A style while I work on some other topics and some other tools for you guys. Thinking maybe of doing a few structured non-live YouTube videos. So if there's little 50-minute topics you want me to cover, if you always wanted to know X, Y, and Z, or the top 3 points for this, or, anything that you think I should weigh in on, I will. I've noticed a few things. I'll just give you a tease. There's a few things recently that I've noticed. One, there's that new news article talking about how if you have ADHD, you're going to die early. And, I think that we should take that with a grain of salt. There's also another bad article that just got sort of brought to the surface about vaccines and the link to autism, which there is not. But this bad blog post got surfaced and is being touted as a peer review journal article, and it's not. And it's by somebody who's retracted most of their own research. So be cautious interpreting stuff out there, because right now there's some scary things being bandied about that say big sweeping generalizations. And not only are they not accurate, they're actually patently wrong. So, let me know what research you'd like me to dig apart. Let me know what neurofeedback or brain topics I can help you understand more of. And I'll do both some ranting in live format for you to chat with me, as well as some short form YouTube videos for you in the very near future. So I think any other questions here? Let's see. That might be it for the night. So if you guys have any other questions burning at the top of your mind, just lay them on me now before we break. Otherwise, you can, if you're watching this later, or if you don't get the question out in time, please feel free to leave it in the comments in the actual video later on. And do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, ring that bell for notifications. And if you could leave a comment here and there in the channel, and or share a video outside of the channel to somebody you think might enjoy it, please do that. That kind of stuff is a huge signal to the YouTube algorithm gods, and they reward me by having more people watch the video and the channel. So we're still just a little above 1,000, like 1,200 or so subscribers. And I want to get the word out as we start to ramp up some content. So I really appreciate everyone showing up and answering questions and contributing their own experiences. And now let me ask you for one more little bit of effort and boost the channel in some way if you could. Okay, so VJ is saying, I give incredible rant. Thank you. Have I seen brain changes or state shifts in QEEGs for spiritual experiences, and can I train specific states? Yeah, I mean, I see lots of incredible state shifts within specific individuals, and I generally can help somebody achieve the ability to create more change. I mean, that's the dirty little secret here, right, VJ? I mean, I know you're working on some specific types of experiences you're trying to achieve, and somebody else might have a very different set of goals. I mean, very, very different. But you both want transformation. That's the secret. So if I listen for what you decide progress is, and we just think about this as a process of gradual transformation, then we can get you to the place where you want to go. And so what ends up happening for the spiritual stuff is, conservatively, neurofeedback and like meditation practices or ecstatic techniques, they start to multiply. And conservatively, you get more than twice out of the combination than each of them would give you. So it's very powerful for combination. And then maybe just a little bit adjunct, a little anecdotal thoughts. I've mapped the brains of 4 or 5, maybe 6 at this point, psychics, including the same psychic a few different times. And they all have similar brain patterns when they do their psychic thing. And this is true of Tyler Henry, who I mapped. You can go watch me. Dr. Drew and I did a play-by-play, like we're sportscasters, while Tyler did a psychic reading on Steve O and had a cap on Tyler's head. And Dr. Drew and I were in the next room doing play-by-plays on the changing brain activity. But the big takeaway was that he was basically in this dissociative state in terms of brain. While he was looking very animated and talking and sweating, the brain looked like he was unconscious or dissociating aggressively. And that is aspects of what I've seen in other psychics. Now, I have one person I work with who's a pet psychic, and she has 2 or 3 different practices, psychic sort of exercises she does. And she's done 2 of them a couple different times now in QEEGs. And I would not expect most people to be able to change the resting brain within a few minutes with a meditation experience. Even extreme practitioners generally can't make huge shifts in the resting brain within minutes. But this one psychic, she could do one exercise and make her brain flex in one direction, do a different exercise, make her brain flex in a different direction. And 6 or 8 weeks after she did it the first time, she had a bunch of neurofeedback and cleaned up some stress and mood and attention stuff, and it looked pretty good. And she went through the same exercises and replicated the same changes. So I don't understand it, but I'm seeing a convergence of experience in these very slow brainwaves coming up in a brief way as people move into strong state shifts. So there's your anecdotal myth for the evening. VJ's now, he's like, wait, what? Okay, yep, you need to see it. Hey, Elliot, thanks for showing up. Any link between how hypnotizable a person is and the effectiveness of neurofeedback on that person? I don't know. I would think yes, but I'm not very hypnotizable, and I'm exceptionally sensitive to neurofeedback. So I don't know. Good question. Maybe you can, we can get Amir Raz, Dr. Raz, to help us do an experiment or something and figure that out. You know, take 10 people and do both neurofeedback and hypnosis on them. And I could look at how quickly their brain produces the event-related spectral perturbation, i.e. how quickly is the brain noticing neurofeedback. And Dr. Raz could do a standard hypnosis exercise, and his rating and galvanic skin response and HRV and subjective rating could all be used to come up with some measure of hypnotizability, assuming there's not already such a thing. There may be. I'm not a hypnosis expert, sorry. That's how I do that experiment, FYI. Let's see. Radar Ashwood hypothesis. Hot singlet, elevated frontal midline theta, is related to undermethylation, and you can probably fix methylation status and see an improvement in the EEG patterns. Yeah, methylation is related to front midline activity, and you can see changes with NAC, with methyl B12, methyl B6, etc. But it's a little bit more complicated than just undermethylating. And you also may have other neurotransmitter turnover beyond the methylation. So yes, that's a factor. You're onto something. But it's multivariate and multilinear. So I don't think it's as simple as hot or high theta is over methylation. You're also going to have several different failure modes, remember, of the anterior cingulate. It's not just tonic theta. There's 4 or 5 different flavors there. And I think they're going to have a different combination of methyl supporting genes as well as other things, obviously. So interesting. You're onto something, but it's a piece of it. I can never say this. Chatterino, DID with a trauma background. Yeah, these psychics are, as far as I can tell, do not fit the classic definition of trauma or dissociative. I've talked to several of them, and while they do have some tough childhood, some of them, I would not necessarily ever think it's in the neighborhood of DID, dissociative identity, or multiple personality, what we used to call it. But they all do seem to have the ability to more dissociate on command while remaining somewhat tethered to the world. In fact, this pet psychic, I could hear her talking the whole time, animated to my staff, and the staff's doing the recording. And then later on, I'm like, okay, I know she was talking. I was hearing her, but it looks like she was asleep on that side of the brain. That's interesting. So it's a phenomena. A lot of things in neurofeedback are phenomenological. And we end up finding the phenomena you care about and helping you steer it and develop it. But we don't always understand the discrete things at that really serious, functional level. So the mystery is part of it. Got to embrace the mystery. VJ says delta goes up. Yep. VJ saying delta and theta wave upregulation correlated with the city's psychic powers. Maybe there could be something there. Yeah, we have to find somebody who's more of an expert than me in this at this point. You're becoming the teacher here, VJ. El Chatterino, there's patterns involving delta. There's beta gamma, indicative of some state shifts or assist in them. Yep. Although they do The at-will state shifts. Yeah, yeah. Radar's asking about methylene blue. Interesting as a oxygen boosting compound. I think people have a little bit of an unreliable response to it, meaning people I think it's going to work for it doesn't. People I think wouldn't need it feel incredible on it. So I think it's fairly innocuous. I think the troches people are making good methylene blue products. I would encourage you perhaps to avoid the ones that are coming with nicotine and with caffeine, because oral caffeine and that kind of administration can be potent for some people. And nicotine, I think, is problematic. Even though it does have nootropic properties, I think it has other properties that are anti-nootropic and therefore probably should be avoided. Both there's issues with tissue health, i.e. mild cancer risk, and there's habit formation risks that I'm a little bit concerned about. But the troches folks do make a just blue version, and I've had several clients and friends try it and really enjoy it. And a few people try it and find it really like way too much overstimulating. So go forth and be Smurfy if you so are inclined, and let me know what you think. The dude. Radar says, I was asking him, I'm not sure I understand that's some control. Al Chatterino. Radar's asking, do you think there's too much of an emphasis on trauma in this field? I mean, trauma exists and we all have a lot of it. Some of us get really dysregulated by it, and some people have trauma that is, more than any one person can bear. Some of us have a predisposition to it. I think that, no, there's certainly an emphasis on trauma-informed therapists, and I think that there may be a little bit too much of an emphasis in neurofeedback as neurofeedback doing the work versus the trauma-informed therapy and container. I mean, it depends on what kind of trauma it is. A lot of trauma has attachment qualities, especially developmental trauma. And you probably don't want to do those 100% in the vacuum of just working on the brain tissue. You also may want to do something that is relational, either therapy or group work or something, to let yourself redevelop those attachment skills in a natural, practical way. And the same is true of other forms of therapy, other forms of trauma, classic PTSD through partner abuse trauma, there's all kinds of subtle variants here. And I think that people have different experiences, and, the therapy part needs to be potentially addressed. And, I end up getting lots and lots of folks who they're very skilled with their anxiety, their trauma. They're deep in the process. And so it's less, I'm not working with therapists quite as much as I used to, because I'm having my more extreme clients who have anxiety know how to have their anxiety to some extent. They've done all the therapy they're going to do. But I think that if you're new to dealing with your trauma and processing it, then working with a trauma-informed person is super useful in a therapy context. If that person knows neurofeedback, amazing. Then they can help you do that too. And if they don't, well, then you can dovetail. You can work with somebody else who knows how to do attachment style work, anxiety style work, with neurofeedback, and then your therapist can, be part of that team as well. That works really well, to have your neurofeedback person and your therapist and you all communicating about your needs. It's kind of great. So, Elliot's asking, can I describe what dissociation looks like in the EEG? Yeah, it's have you ever seen somebody about to fall asleep? That's what it looks like. Big swells of slow brain waves that are fighting to, in about to fall asleep, they come and go, and you can sort of see the brain waking up after each of those swells. But in dissociative phenomena, they don't really wake up the same way. It kind of goes offline for a little while. And you'll see it happening in regions involved with sensory processing, especially. So some parietal regions, there is some frontal component to it, but you'll see it a lot parietally in the back of the head, sensory tissues. Remember kids, the front half of the brain's the inside self, the back half of the brain's the outside world. So having lots of slow brainwaves start up in the back of the head may be involved with people disengaging from the outside world and no longer processing effectively in those tissues that would bring in and integrate the outside world there in the back of the head. All right, on that note, I've slid down here in my chair. I got to fix my little circle camera here. So what do you guys think? Should I keep the beard? I can't decide. You can give some fashion advice, some grooming advice before I leave tonight. There are still a half a dozen of you guys who've stayed a full hour. So thank you. You must be my hardcore followers. All right, guys. So I will see you in a week, or you'll see me in a week, probably more accurately. I do see a few of you guys who are on this chat right now, face-to-face or semi-face-to-face. VJ's got to vote for the beard. I should keep the beard. Beard's working? All right. It definitely is professorial. Elliot's asking, how much does dissociation look like alpha theta? It doesn't really. Dissociation is more gone than alpha theta, more slow brain waves, more excess in that delta. And you probably wouldn't see the same kind of crossover states, the awareness states of the high theta and lower alpha. I don't know if that's true, but from the ones I've looked at, I think it's true. Don't hold me to that, but my hunch is it's not similar to the hypnagogic state, which actually has a fairly large amount of awareness. It's just not a linear monkey mind awareness. It's more of the back of the head being deeply wide open and aware. I think of dissociative states as almost being the opposite of that, of the back of the head being shut down. So just conceptualizing, don't hold me to it, but that's my hot take. So, okay. Well, thanks Radar for another vote for the beard. I'll keep it trimmed. This is about as long as I'll let it get, because I turn into a crazy hippie in the woods, or a monk who must dispense. Yeah, if the beard's any longer, I'm going to go to a mountaintop and you have to climb up there to talk to me. That's where it's going, basically. So, all right. Guys, have a lovely evening. Thanks so much for your attention. Remember, I'm always here to answer questions, so please feel free to hit the websites that I have linked in the show notes. Come book a call with me. Calls with me for intro, 20, 30-minute calls are free. I'm here to tell you about how you can learn more about your brain and to help you take control of it. So take good care of those brains. Until I see you next time,